The Strait of Hormuz was once considered Iran's ultimate weapon, a narrow corridor of water, barely visible on a map, yet powerful enough to shake the global economy overnight. For decades, Tehran used it like a loaded gun pointed directly at the world's energy supply. Every missile test, every naval exercise, every threat carried the same terrifying message. If Iran closed Hormuz, the world would feel it instantly. Oil prices would explode, global trade would freeze, Asian economies would panic, and the Gulf monarchies would be trapped inside a burning battlefield with nowhere to run. But now something extraordinary is happening beneath the deserts of the Middle East. Massive steel pipelines are cutting across mountains and sand. Billion-dollar rail corridors are reshaping the region. Hidden air defense networks are rising around critical infrastructure. And behind all of it is a single objective: to make Iran's most dangerous geopolitical threat completely powerless. But what happens when a nation built on deterrence suddenly begins losing its leverage? That is where this story becomes dangerous. For years, the Strait of Hormuz was more than just a shipping lane. It was Iran's insurance policy. Nearly 20% of the world's oil supply moved through that narrow maritime corridor, linking the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman. Tankers carrying crude to China, India, Japan, and South Korea had no choice but to pass through waters constantly shadowed by Iranian fast attack boats, missile batteries, drones, and naval mines. And Tehran understood the psychological power of that reality better than anyone. Every regional crisis immediately turned attention toward Hormuz. Global markets reacted within minutes. Insurance premiums surged. Tanker operators panicked. Oil futures spiked. Iran never needed to completely close the strait to create fear. The threat alone was enough. But then came the escalating tensions of 2026. Missile exchanges, maritime sabotage, drone attacks near key Gulf infrastructure, reports of mines appearing near shipping corridors. The entire region suddenly looked one mistake away from catastrophe. And this is where the Gulf states reached a brutal conclusion. They could no longer afford dependence on Hormuz. Not politically, not economically, and certainly not militarily. The United Arab Emirates moved first. Deep inside Abu Dhabi's desert lies the Habshan oil complex, one of the beating hearts of Emirati energy production. Vast amounts of crude oil flow through this region every single day. Protecting it is essential to the survival of the UAE economy. But moving that oil safely to global markets was becoming increasingly dangerous. So Abu Dhabi accelerated one of the most ambitious energy bypass projects in the modern Middle East. A massive pipeline stretching from Habshan all the way to Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman, away from Hormuz, away from Iranian pressure, away from the choke point that had haunted Gulf security calculations for decades. The first version of this route had already entered operation years earlier, but the regional instability of 2026 exposed its limitations immediately. Existing export capacity simply wasn't enough if a major maritime crisis erupted. So the UAE launched an enormous expansion project worth billions, and what emerged was far more than a pipeline. It was a strategic declaration, a geopolitical escape route. The new line cuts across nearly 400 kilometers of unforgiving terrain, mountains, desert, extreme heat. But the engineering challenge was secondary compared to the political message it sent. The UAE was preparing for a future where Hormuz no longer controlled its destiny. What happened next changed everything. As construction accelerated, Fujairah rapidly transformed into one of the most important energy hubs on Earth. Massive storage terminals expanded, blending facilities multiplied. Tankers arriving from Asia increasingly viewed Fujairah as a safer alternative to vulnerable Gulf loading zones. The implications were enormous. Once fully integrated, the expanded route would allow the UAE to redirect most of its oil exports directly into the Indian Ocean without touching Hormuz at all. That changes the balance of power. Suddenly, Iran's traditional leverage over Gulf oil flows begins weakening. And military analysts notice something even more alarming. This wasn't happening only in the UAE. Saudi Arabia was building its own parallel strategy, quietly, aggressively, and on a scale capable of reshaping global logistics forever. Because while the world focused on missiles and naval tensions, Riyadh was building an entirely new trade architecture beneath the desert itself. Saudi Arabia understood something critical. In modern geopolitical warfare, survival no longer depends only on tanks, fighter jets, or aircraft carriers. It depends on infrastructure. Who controls the routes, controls the future. And Riyadh had no intention of allowing Hormuz to remain a permanent vulnerability. Under Vision 2030, Saudi planners launched one of the largest transportation transformations in the kingdom's history. At the center of it stood the Land Bridge Project, a colossal rail corridor linking the Red Sea to the Persian Gulf. Nearly 1,500 kilometers of interconnected logistics infrastructure designed to bypass maritime choke points entirely. This was not just a railway, it was a strategic bypass weapon. Container traffic arriving from Asia could unload at Gulf ports, cross Saudi territory by high-speed freight rail, and reach the Red Sea within hours, instead of enduring long and vulnerable maritime routes. And this is where the situation became dangerous, because every kilometer of new rail reduced the strategic value of Hormuz itself. Ports like Jeddah, Jubail, Dammam, and King Abdullah Port became nodes in a massive alternative trade network designed to survive even during regional conflict. Global shipping companies immediately recognized the significance. The faster the system expanded, the less dependent international trade became on Iran's maritime shadow. But Riyadh's most powerful move was hidden underground: the Petroline pipeline, a 1,200-kilometer steel artery transporting crude oil from eastern Saudi fields directly to the Red Sea port of Yanbu, far away from Iranian missiles, far away from naval mines, far away from Hormuz. During the 2026 crisis, Petroline became one of the most important energy lifelines on the planet. As maritime tensions escalated, Saudi Arabia increased throughput dramatically, allowing millions of barrels per day to continue reaching global markets, even while fears of Hormuz disruption intensified. Without that line, energy analysts warned oil prices could have spiraled into catastrophic territory. Western economies feared inflation shocks. Asian importers feared shortages. Global markets feared panic. But the bypass system held, and that changed strategic calculations across the region. Iran suddenly faced a reality it had long tried to prevent. Its ability to hold global energy hostage was slowly eroding. But Tehran was not about to watch quietly. Iranian military doctrine has always emphasized asymmetric warfare: cheap drones, swarm tactics, ballistic missiles, naval harassment, electronic warfare, and these new Gulf megaprojects presented a tempting target. Pipelines are static, railways are exposed, storage terminals are vulnerable. Protecting thousands of kilometers of infrastructure against coordinated missile and drone attacks is an enormous military challenge. Iran's Shahed drones already demonstrated how low-cost systems could threaten billion-dollar infrastructure. Ballistic missile systems like the Fateh and Zulfiqar families expanded that threat radius even further. Military planners in the Gulf knew exactly what this meant. The bypass routes could not survive without an entirely new defense doctrine. So the Gulf states began building something far larger than pipelines. They began building fortified energy corridors. Patriot missile systems expanded around critical infrastructure. THAAD batteries reinforced high-altitude interception coverage. Radar systems multiplied across the desert. But the Pentagon and Gulf commanders understood traditional missile defense alone would not be enough. Drone warfare had changed everything. Small, cheap, low-flying UAVs could bypass conventional defenses and strike critical targets with terrifying efficiency. And then came the response nobody expected. The UAE and Saudi Arabia began constructing integrated, multi-layered defense ecosystems around their new energy networks. Electronic warfare systems, AI-assisted surveillance, counter-drone laser platforms, underground sensor grids, autonomous maritime patrol vessels near Fujairah, continuous AWACS monitoring, cyber defense networks protecting industrial control systems. The Gulf was no longer simply exporting oil, it was militarizing survival itself. And behind the scenes, the Pentagon was watching every move carefully, because the future of global energy security was beginning to shift from open sea dominance to hardened land-based corridors protected like military fortresses. The consequences of this transformation extend far beyond the Middle East. What is unfolding is not simply an energy infrastructure upgrade, it is a geopolitical power shift. For decades, the Strait of Hormuz gave Iran disproportionate strategic influence over global markets. Even the possibility of disruption granted Tehran leverage during negotiations, sanctions crises, and military escalations. But alternative routes are changing the equation, slowly, relentlessly, and Iran knows it. Every new bypass pipeline weakens the psychological pressure Tehran once projected across the region. Every expanded rail corridor reduces the fear surrounding Hormuz itself. That is why Iranian strategists increasingly view these Gulf projects as direct threats to regional influence, not just economic threats, strategic threats. Because once energy exporters can safely bypass Hormuz at scale, Iran loses one of its most powerful geopolitical cards, and this is where military tensions could escalate even further. Analysts fear Tehran may attempt to target the perception of safety surrounding these routes rather than destroy them outright. Even limited attacks on storage terminals, pumping stations, or logistics hubs could create global panic. That alone could spike oil prices. That alone could shake markets. And the Gulf states understand this perfectly, which is why defense spending across the region is exploding. The UAE has intensified protection around Fujairah using layered air defense systems, electronic warfare platforms, and rapid response naval units. Saudi Arabia has expanded security around Petroline and the land bridge network using drones, thermal imaging systems, radar surveillance, and specialized desert patrol forces. But that was only the beginning. A broader Gulf-wide defense integration effort quietly accelerated behind closed doors. Shared radar networks, joint early warning systems, real-time intelligence coordination, cross-border missile tracking, American satellite surveillance, AWACS aircraft operating in support roles. The architecture emerging across the Gulf increasingly resembles a regional defensive shield designed specifically for infrastructure survival during prolonged conflict. And what military analysts noticed next was alarming. The battlefield itself is evolving. Future wars in the Middle East may no longer focus primarily on occupying territory. Instead, they may revolve around infrastructure paralysis, pipelines, ports, cyber networks, energy corridors, drone swarms, satellite disruption, economic warfare. The Gulf states are adapting rapidly because they understand a terrifying reality. If these bypass systems fail during a major regional conflict, the consequences would be global. Oil markets could spiral, shipping routes could collapse, Asian supply chains could freeze, inflation shocks could spread worldwide within days. And that explains why so many nations are now deeply invested in the stability of these projects. China needs uninterrupted Gulf energy. India depends on reliable oil flows. Europe fears another energy crisis. The United States wants regional stability without direct, large-scale military entanglement. Everyone has something at stake. Meanwhile, Iran faces mounting pressure from a changing strategic environment it can no longer fully control. The irony is extraordinary. For years, Hormuz gave Tehran leverage through geography. Now geography itself is being redesigned around Iran. Steel pipelines crossing deserts, railways bypassing choke points, integrated air defense systems shielding infrastructure, artificial intelligence monitoring energy corridors. The Middle East is entering a new era where economic survival and military deterrence are merging into a single doctrine. And if these systems succeed, the balance of power across the Gulf may never look the same again. But if even one major attack penetrates those defenses, the entire region could ignite overnight. The battle over Hormuz is no longer just about ships and oil tankers. It is now a battle over infrastructure, survival, and the future balance of power in the Middle East. The Gulf states are spending tens of billions of dollars to escape a strategic trap that has haunted them for decades. Pipelines, railways, missile shields, drones, cyber defenses, all of it points toward one goal: ending dependence on the Strait of Hormuz forever. But history has shown that when geopolitical leverage begins slipping away, dangerous actors rarely remain passive. Iran still possesses missiles, drones, asymmetric naval forces, and the ability to create chaos faster than global markets can react. So the real question is no longer whether the Gulf can bypass Hormuz. The real question is whether these new steel lifelines can survive the next regional crisis, because if they cannot, the next shockwave will not stay in the Middle East. It will hit the entire world, and that may be the most dangerous part of all.